Welcome to the ChannelX 2026 Leaders Interviews, and delighted to be joined by Bobbie today, who is Marketing Director at GFS. So welcome, Bobbie. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you very much, Chris.
Now, Bobbie, we're coming up to International Women's Day as we're recording this, and you're a woman that's made it right to the top of two male-dominated industries, IT and logistics. But you've made it to the top. So why are you such a vocal champion for women in the workplace still?
It's simple because the data still tells a very clear story which is that we've progressed, but the equality gap still exists, especially at senior levels. And because I've lived it, I entered the workplace more than 30 years ago. I went straight into technology. So as my career progressed, I often found that I was the only woman in the room, the only woman at the table, and often the only one expected to prove that I belonged there. Statistics show that the gender equality gap has been closing over the years, but very slowly. And what drives and motivates me today is that there is still a gap that we need to close. And from my perspective, it's a responsibility that we all need to take control of to help solve it, not only for our daughters, but for every young woman that enters the workplace.
Fantastic. And I know a little bit about your daughter, and I'm going to come back to that at the end of the interview. But before we get specifically into IT and logistics, what's the kind of UK-wide picture for women in the workplace and the gender pay gap?
Well, look, as I said before, and I don't want to be giving a negative impression, we've come a long way, especially since when I entered the workplace. It's very different, but the job is not yet done. So even if we look at simply, the difference in pay, the Office of National Statistics, I think they reported that in April 2025, on average, across all sectors, across all job levels, women were paid about 7% less than men. And that was only April 2025.
It was less than a year ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it shocks me, really. And I have to admit, sometimes I fail to notice, because I see women like you at GFS and Eve Williams at eBay. I deal with so many women on a daily basis, right at the top of the ladder. But what's the current reality for women in IT and logistics that are maybe starting out today?
Again, looking at the statistics, both sectors, IT and logistics, have made progress, but not nearly fast enough. Women tend to generally be underrepresented in leadership roles, underpaid in comparison to males doing similar roles, and absent when you come to look at sort of senior executive and board level positions, or not as visible as they should be, let's say. And that's where the agenda is being set. If we look specifically at IT, again to the Office of National Statistics, in 2024, they reported that women represented about 30% of the total workforce in that sector. And although this is progress, if we compare 2016 up to 2024, we see that progress, but the sector is still structurally male heavy, especially in core technical roles. If we now flip over to logistics, transport and storage and logistics, that sector in general, then the figure is even worse. ONS report that just 23% of the total workforce is women. And generally in transport, the higher you go up into P&L areas, into senior leadership positions, the fewer women you see. So the gender imbalance is even more pronounced within logistics than it is in technology.
And what's the difference between IT and logistics for women? I mean, why is one different to the other?
I think again, this is based on a combination of data and my direct experience. I would say that in IT, the challenge is technical gatekeeping. It's easy to feel you don't belong unless you can do code, basically. That's what it shows. And that's backed by data evidence. When we look at the number of women in those technical roles, it's very low compared to men. In logistics, it's more cultural. The environment can still feel very old school, operational, and male-centric. But in both areas, in both sectors, what makes the difference is visibility, credibility, and sponsorship. It's not just about capability, but those areas are going to be really important. And I'll come on to those a bit later.
And what's actually driving the underrepresentation of women in these sectors? I mean, it's 2026, for God's sake. Surely we should be a bit more sex equality in the workplace than we are at the moment.
So, Chris, there's no single factor that you can point to that as the cause for underrepresentation for women in these two sectors at senior positions. There's multiple factors. If you look at the research and industry evidence, there's multiple factors. But from my personal perspective, the key one is lack of sponsorship to high visibility roles. And that's why I always tell women, don't just focus on building your capability. Build visibility and sponsorship.
Yeah, and I think that from my perspective, that's just as important for men. Don't just find capable women, but put them in highly visible roles and actually sponsor them and encourage as well.
Exactly. And it is about, for me, sponsorship is not mentoring. So it's, when I say build sponsorship, it's really building support in the business at a senior level, someone that you know is going to speak for you when you're not in the room. That's sponsorship. Yeah, and that's really vital.
And talking of being in the room, a lot of people say, yeah, Bobbie, but we have more women in boardrooms nowadays.
Yes.
Is that true? I mean, you're in the boardroom, aren't you?
Yes. It's taken me a long time to get there, but yes, I'd like to see more women in the boardroom, though, Chris. That's the whole point of this. Yes, it is true, and from the UK perspective, is one of our biggest success stories. The FTSE Women Leaders Review reported women held 43% of FTSE 350 board positions in 2024, which is up from 40% in 2023. So yes, women in the boardroom has increased in the UK from 40 to 43%. But here's the nuance. When you look at CEOs of those FTSE 350 companies, there were only the number of women that held those CEO positions is much smaller. And this, in fact, dropped to just 19 women being CEOs out of the 350. Logistics itself lags significantly behind the industry with average of women at board level. But also when you come down to the next level, the executive leadership level, women only hold 35% of those positions across the FTSE 350 if we're looking at exec leadership roles. So we've seen some progress at board level, but the executive power gap still remains.
So getting down to the nitty gritty, what can organisations do to change this? I mean, roughly 50% of the population are women. It should be kind of 50-50, both at junior positions, executive positions and boardroom. So how can an organisation actually make a change so that we can get there?
Chris, there are multiple improvements that companies can make at a system and policy level that can drive that change, such as transparent pay bands and promotion criteria, which will help reduce the hidden rules that you can find yourself up against, and diverse hiring and promotion panels. There's also sponsorship, not just mentoring, which is what I mentioned earlier. The sponsor is someone that will speak up for you when you're not in the room. Flexible working, and let's face it, since COVID, a lot of people have moved to hybrid, but that number is rolling back. I thought we all have this perception that everybody still works from home. In fact, there's just 23% of the workforce that currently are in hybrid roles. So 77% are still sort of back in the office. So flexibility is a key one. And measuring leadership diversity, especially at exec and board levels, which is where we see the biggest gaps. If it's not measured, the gaps stay invisible and can't be addressed. So measuring the diversity at board and exec levels is really important.
And the strange thing is, Bobbie, these things that you're saying, they all sound pretty easy. I mean, flexible working without a penalty, we were all doing it during COVID. Everyone was working from home. It's not that difficult. I know there's a time for collaboration, and just measuring leadership roles and diversity at the executive and board levels, it's really not that hard. But I guess sometimes it's easier to not measure it and keep it invisible, because then you don't have to admit that there aren't as many women in these roles as should be.
Yeah, it's about transparency about pay, transparency about diversity in, at these board and exec levels. It's transparency.
I get something a little bit more personal to you now. Your daughter. So I know she's only 19, but she's a professional footballer. Just a few months back, moved overseas to play first division football. And yet football's a whole industry that's only just waking up to the women's game. What changes would you like to see there? We've been talking about IT and we've been talking about logistics. What about footballers?
Well, that's an easy one to answer, Chris. I think it's got to be to improve the pay gap between what female footballers get paid and what male footballers get paid. So the average salary for a woman in the Women's Super League is around £47,000 a year. Okay. Now compare this to an English Premier League player, male. They're earning on average about 3 million a year. So there's a huge difference.
47,000 or 3 million.
Exactly. So women's elite players earn single-digit percentages of what male elite players get paid at the top level. But this boils down to huge differences in revenue and commercial scale between male and female football, right? I mean, that is the reality.
Bobbie, I've got to say, we've seen this in other sports as well. And when Wimbledon comes up, the men and the ladies, they get paid the same. Just saying the commercials aren't there yet. That can't be the entire story, because why can't we take some from the men's game, put it in the women's game and even things out? There's got to be a route, surely.
What you say, yeah. What I'm trying to say is that the harsh realities boil down to commercial aspects. It's not gender, it's not capability, it's to do with how much these clubs earn and what they can afford to pay their players. So a women's elite football club, so if we look at Chelsea, if we look at Arsenal, if we group all those top elite clubs together, I think last year they generated about £158 million of revenue, which doesn't sound too bad. But then when you compare that to an elite, male football club like Real Madrid, they generated 713 million euros of revenue last year.
So that's the top 15 women versus just one male club.
Exactly. So the gap is huge, in terms of the commercial gap between the two is huge. How they make money. If they've got more money, they can pay their players more because they're generating huge amounts of money. But all is not lost. Women's football is rapidly developing. Analysts forecast that by 2030, the fan base is going to grow by 800 million plus fans, and it will be a top global sport. So fingers crossed we see that coming through.
Yeah, and personally, I really hope so, because your daughter's only 19, so she's still got a good few playing years left in her, and hopefully by the time 2030 comes around, she'll be starting to see pay, if not equal to the men, at least approaching and closing that pay gap.
Yeah. Although, Chris, to be honest with you, she's not in it for the money, although I keep telling her about that. It's her passion. She's been playing since she was 4 years old. So she's doing something that is her passion. So, yeah.
So you've been a proper football mum over the years.
Definitely. Yes. Yes.
But getting back to you, and
Yeah.
it's and women in general, but especially in IT and logistics, what would you say to the women who are listening to this?
Gosh, it's, I mean, when I say this, I speak from the heart because I've been consistent about this from day one. It's really have the right mindset. Look at the data and recognize that it's not a level playing field. Okay. So your career is your responsibility, not your employer's. So take ownership of your own career, be clear in your intent and your ambition, and above all, be unapologetic. Okay, that's really important. Be unapologetic. So start small, ask for the stretch role, put your hand up, say yes before you feel ready, and very crucially, build visibility and sponsorship within the business at a higher level. Talent is essential regardless of gender. Okay. And we're talking today about women, inequality for women, but we see inequality at lots of levels within business. So it's not just about, women, but this point around talent is essential regardless of gender. That's really key. Your talent should be what propels you through a business. The reality is that's not always the case. But in male-dominated sectors like technology, like logistics, sponsorship is often the difference between being excellent at your job but stuck at the same level or being promoted. So take ownership, take responsibility, and above all, be unapologetic.
And I think the only thing I could possibly add to that is to all the boys out there like myself, is be a sponsor. Make sure you're talking up for women when they aren't in the room, and make sure that they're getting equal opportunities. But Bobbie, I've got to say, I admire you so much for getting to the top in your game in two industries, both IT and logistics. So thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your thoughts and insights.
Thank you, Chris.